Welcome to Uplink. The aviation dialogue starts here. I'm Shaesta Ways.
And I'm Michael Wiles.
Thank you for joining us. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Good. How's your weekend been?
Good. Just, busy, taking care of my son, cleaning up the house, getting ready for the week. How was yours?
It was good. I just got back from Sun and Fun in Lakeland, Florida. It was a pretty good show. Mm-hmm. Turnout was pretty good. Got to hang out with the Blue Angels on their arrival date. And I had one really interesting experience talking to one of the pilots.
Okay.
He said he didn't start flying until he was 25. And
no way.
That surprised me because usually we in our heads we have this idea that people who are in the highest military pilot positions have a really early start. So it was really impressive to hear that. The other surprise is that they do 60 shows a year, which is
a lot.
So
So
I'm just recovering from the show.
Yeah, that it's interesting you say that because I think when I wanted to get into the military, well, it was an idea that crossed my mind. I was like, gosh, I want to fly fighter jets. And the only way you could do that is if you join the military. And I think at the time I was 20, when I was thinking about this, 22, 23. And I'm not kidding you. People said that I was too old.
Wow.
I know. So it's good to hear that you could, you could be 25 and still get in. That's quite impressive.
Yeah.
And 60 shows is a lot. But they have seriously the best pilots, the most competent, capable pilots. But yeah, that is a lot.
And it's not just the pilots. Apparently, off the team, there are about 170 people that make up the Blue Angels team. So this is pilots, mechanics, people who do security, coordination. And so we kind of take it for granted when we see what goes on. But it really was an impressive experience.
That's good. Well, I'm glad you had a great time at Sun and Fun. Wish I could have been there. I was kind of on manning the fort in terms of we came out with this incredible announcement for Soar, which was picked up by several news media outlets. Flying covered it, AIN covered it, and there were a couple more. And so just kind of, managing all of those great media coverage and conversations that followed up right after. So it's been a busy week.
Yeah, and I'm excited to jump back into it this week as we continue to move forward towards building the hub.
Right.
And following up from our conversation last week, we had a conversation with Dr. Sharon DeVivo from Vaughan College. And towards the end of the conversation, we talked about the mechanic shortage. And this week, we decided to dive deeper into the issue.
So when it came time to thinking about, who could really talk about mechanics, the shortage, the opportunities, Michael, you and I were talking about this, and you introduced me to Jonas Murby, who is a principal at AeroDynamic Advisory, which is a specialty consulting firm that focuses on global aerospace and aviation industries. You've actually met Jonas before and you've interviewed him. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so last year, while I was the business editor for Fly Magazine, I interviewed Jonas for a story about the mechanic shortage, and he was so insightful, and it really painted a picture to me about why the aviation mechanic shortage is as bad as it is, and even a bigger shortage than the pilot shortage. And I really realize now how much work we have to do to attract young people, or just people in general, to the industry. There are a lot of obstacles that the industry will need to overcome to attract mechanics, from wages to perception to technology. And if we don't do this, we run the risk of falling behind you could see wage inflation across the board, and this could just have downstream effects for the public. So it was really insightful to talk to him, and there wasn't a better guest that came to mind for this episode.
Yeah, he lives in Norway, so that was really nice that he was able to accommodate us and be able to contribute. Let's tune in and hear what Jonas had to say. Our Uplink guest today is Jonas Murby, principal at AeroDynamic Advisory, which is a specialty consulting firm focused on global aerospace and aviation industries. Jonas has worked with MROs, maintenance, repair, and overhaul, OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, and investors for nearly 2 decades on making strategic decisions. Jonas, welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So we'll just dive into it, Jonas. I would love to ask you, how did the aviation industry end up in this position with a major workforce shortage? And how did the pandemic exacerbate the mechanic shortage?
Yeah, good question. And I think, back in 2019, we were already thinking of this as an industry because you could read the reports already then that, within the coming decade, so and so many hundreds of thousands of mechanics would be needed. But I think it was still considered a longer term project back then. And then suddenly we were hit with COVID, and the older generation, the baby boomer generation, they began to retire as a result of this. But you also, due to the instability that was caused by the pandemic, you also lost a bunch of the younger generation inside of this. So I think aerospace was hard hit by that pandemic. The big shift that was going to happen, it just happened way too soon. And I think it was very difficult for us to predict. What I think maybe the aviation industry can learn from it is that perhaps we can't lean on as much as before that aviation has an inherent advantage because aviation is so exciting. It is exciting for us that work in it, but it's not necessarily exciting for people who are not part of it. And I think we have leaned a bit on that too hard, and I think we need to do newer things to attract people.
So it sounds like there are a series of convergent trends that have really made the shortage worse. It seems like retirements, like you mentioned, and competing industries have made it worse. Are there any other factors that you can think of that has made the mechanic shortage particularly worse?
Yeah, there are a few things. And I think that's another thing that we didn't think of before this pandemic, at least not myself. It is that we're undergoing a demographic shift, which is, it's not only aerospace, it's a demographic shift in many countries, which, towards the end of the pandemic, when things were returning, it wasn't only in aerospace that you would ask the question, where is everybody? You have lack of people everywhere, and that will make it more difficult for aerospace to get people back. So there's that element of competing with others, as you say. Beyond that, I think there's something that will be particularly present in North America is the geopolitical shifts that are happening and the reshoring, meaning that stuff that was previously produced in China, for example, may now be produced in North America, which means there's a lot of investment activity going up in the US, building new factories and everything. And that means beyond the demographic shift, you also have this reshoring thing. So there will be pressures in really accessing all the people that are needed for this. And then I think that there is a final thing as well, which is more short term, but given that a lot of these people with decades of experience left the industry and you brought in some new people in different roles, companies are still struggling with achieving the productivity that they had pre-pandemic. And so I spoke with an OEM recently. They said that they're back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of number of employees, but they're producing 90% of what they did before. And over time, that's going to shift and people are going to learn. Companies will become more productive. But I think that is helping it's contributing to the shortage in the short and medium term.
Jonas, I'd love to just pick your brain on this. So airlines recently have come out with several initiatives to help boost pilot pay significantly. In terms of pay, because I know just from talking about within my friends of mechanics and technicians, they say that it's a lot of long hours. It's a lot of work, and the pay is not where it needs to be to compensate for what they're doing. So with regards to a boost in pay, do you know why we haven't heard of any similar financial boost for mechanics too?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, I don't know, so this is just a guess. I think airline management would love to increase the pay. But I think, right now you see airlines having really good yields. And it's because we're in a supply constrained environment. So right now, airlines are making a lot of money. They can afford to pay more money to the pilots. And they probably focus on that because it's a more direct impact. If you don't have that pilot, you can't fly the plane. If you don't have a mechanic, well, in the worst case, you can maybe bring in a contractor or something for the short term. So I think they recognize the problem, but they see it as maybe a midterm or longer term problem. And the other factor in this is that we're in a geopolitically more unstable time. And so I think airlines are, they're enjoying their high yields now, but they remain quite careful in terms of adding extra costs. And they have increasing fuel costs, insurance costs, spare parts costs. Costs are increasing everywhere. And I think they're just really careful in adding more of that.
And you're right. Even though they are enjoying high yields right now, they still haven't regained pre-pandemic capacity still. So I think, the last set of numbers that came out in at least the fourth quarter is, all the airlines across the board were sort of at 85% capacity in terms of passengers traveling. And so, they're benefiting from the higher fuel costs, which is allowing them to, rake in these profits. But really, fundamentally, the business hasn't really gotten better. So I agree with what you're saying. They are trying to be cautious about, who to bring on, because we know the industry is cyclical. And so they're probably trying to anticipate not overstretching and then having to pull back. You talked about this earlier about the change in demographics. Where do you think young people are going if they're not coming to mechanic jobs? Where are people looking for other careers?
I have heard all different types of examples here, and some are as easy as you go over to Amazon, and the relative pay may be actually pretty good depending on where you are. Others leave to jobs with, say, manufacturing, where there's more automation, more of this technology aspect in it. You have new power industry, wind turbines, and all of that. It represents an industry that perhaps can be seen by some as more of the future compared to aviation.
And Jonas, as a woman in aviation, if you look at the numbers, only 3% of mechanics are women. Why is that? Why are we not able as an industry to attract more women mechanics?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think overall, if you look at the number of car mechanics, you don't have a lot of women there either. And I think overall, on a population level, you probably have more men interested in dealing with things overall on a population level. Of course, there can be a lot more done, and I think aviation needs to do things to attract women into this space. And I mean, that is about changing the entire work experience to fit women, but also to fit the entire kind of Generation Z that is coming. You need to do a lot of things to fit that new generation, and getting women into there is part of that.
I like that, changing the work environment, because, we've done it one way for so long, and we just have to change the way that we are doing this if we want to attract new, different people, diverse people, exactly, like women. So I like that.
And I think the perception of the job is that it's still a dirty job as opposed to a job that requires a lot of intellect. And so even though the job has progressed, you think about what's happening with power plants and how they're becoming more connected, and the need for mechanics to have not just mechanical skills, but also high level IT skills. It's still being perceived as a dirty job by the public. And so perhaps women and men are not really they don't have the full perspective of what the job is. And so they're not even considering it, even though the pay, as you're saying, has been competitive with other industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are those environmental aspects, as you say, although it of course varies a bit with the work that you do. If you're in a component maintenance shop, it may not be the same as if you're on the ramp doing things. So there are variations there. But I agree that there is an environmental aspect of it, and I think that goes a bit also to the role of, you know, the wishes of the young generation, including women, which is you probably want more flexibility in I mean, that's a stated fact that the newer generation they value flexibility, meaning and purpose. And those aspects, you know, if you got to bring those into these jobs and kind of reframe them in a way.
Jonas, could we hit a critical mass, and what would that mean or do to companies if we were to reach that point?
What do you mean with critical mass?
You know, abundance of work required to be done by mechanics, but not enough mechanics to get the work done. And so industries have to sort of intentionally pull back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's an interesting point and something that has come up in conversations I've had before, because aviation is very specialized, and it means over time, if you want continuity in an activity, you need kind of this mix of skilled personnel and tribal knowledge, and that requires that people are actually there and in the game for a while, so that you don't have too much of a turnover, and people basically stay there over time. And obviously things change in an industry, and perhaps you know, some companies just move or whatever. And if you lose those local capabilities and tribal knowledge and skill sets, it's very difficult to build it up again. And I think that's the risk for this industry, is that whereas, you know, at the big airlines and the big OEMs and everything, they will be able to keep skilled people employed. But on the margins, on the outskirts of the industry, not only geographically, but perhaps on a skill set level, on the margins, if you begin to lose that kind of mass of knowledge and tribal knowledge, it will be difficult to build it back. And then that means it becomes a more concentrated industry, and perhaps not as broad as we have seen it until now.
So it seems like this conversation has been going on for a while in terms of the mechanic issue, and it seems like it will continue to go on based on charts and projections that we've seen. Can you think of some low-hanging fruits that companies and the industry could take to create some solutions? And then are there some structural changes that you think we need to put in place?
If I knew of low-hanging fruit, I would be really well paid, I can say that. But structurally, I think what you guys are doing, your initiative here, and what I've read about it is something that's actually really, really important from a structural perspective. Because if you look at the aviation ecosystem as a pyramid, the problem in terms of talent is not at the top with the aircraft OEMs. They actually, Airbus CEO, he said the other week, they actually have, they're overemployed. Not that they intend to fire people, but they have more employees than they need at the moment. The problem is they recruit from the tiers below them. And the lower you go in terms of the tiers, the more perceived volatility you have in terms of, so if you're a worker and you have an offer for a job at a local repair shop, well, that may, the perceived volatility is higher than higher up in. So what I believe is that the problems is how to retain people in the lower tiers of this ecosystem, and those are equally important, or even more important than higher up in the pyramid. And if you have a bunch of smaller companies, these companies themselves don't have the ability to build up the pipeline of students. They don't have the ability to kind of build a narrative and sense of belonging and a sense of meaning and purpose. They are dependent on this happening in a bigger environment. And I think that's what your initiative is contributing to doing. So I think that's a part of a structural action, you can say. And the other is, I think aviation still needs to build a narrative. We're working on it, but the industry itself needs to build a narrative that again jives with the population. We're still not being seen as a part of the solution for the future. We're seen as so we need to work on that. And I think, there were, I just heard anecdotes, but there was somebody who told me that their friend got a job in aerospace in Spain, and the friends of this person, they were all kind of, well, we're sorry. We'll probably find a better job later on.
Right.
It's just aviation just wasn't seen in a positive light in that way. And so we got to work on changing that narrative.
Jonas, I recently spoke with a recruiter in aviation, and they were saying that a lot of young people, they don't like aviation because it pollutes our planet, and yes, it's just not environmentally stable. So they're against it. And, my response to that was, those are the people that we need to bring on to aviation in our industry, because they're going to find the solutions so that we're not, that we're more environmentally friendly, and they can work on sustainable aviation fuels and so on. So, it's so great that young people are passionate about it. And, I feel the same way. So, let's find a way to recruit those folks to come and work, because they're definitely going to help us get there closer and faster.
Yeah, really good idea.
All right. Well, Jonas, it's been so wonderful. Thank you for making the time to connect with us. I know this is a very important and hot topic in aviation. So we value your insights today, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing me on.
Thank you, Jonas.
And good luck.
Thank you. Gosh, what a great conversation, and what a insightful guest, Jonas Murby. Thank you.
I'm so glad he was able to make the time, and he echoed some of the same things we covered during my story with him last year. And the thing that keeps sticking is that just there's a perception that aviation isn't a clean industry, and we have to overcome that if we're going to want to attract young people. So, growing up, it was quite the opposite. When you talk about working in aviation, you would it seemed like forgive my pun, a high calling. Now we're up against the perception of pollution and noise and so much more. And so the industry really has to work towards doing a better job. And I'm so glad that Jonas highlighted that.
Another thing that I really appreciated him talking about is changing the work environment. Because I don't know, like when you just think of aviation as a whole, airplanes pretty much are the same as the dawn of aviation. Like there hasn't been these very big dramatic changes. And so I think we've gotten really comfortable with the idea of if it's not broke, don't fix it, or just this mentality that this is the way we've been doing it for so long. So why change it? I think as we look at these numbers, only 3% of mechanics are women. Like that's so sad that we don't have women who are very critical and great multitaskers and just resourceful. We don't have this talent that's working in the mechanic sector. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think it's not only we have to change the work environment for women, we also have to do it for this new generation that is very aware of what they want in life, and they're not gonna settle with a job that doesn't meet their expectations.
So that was a great conversation, and we look forward to diving more into that topic as we move forward and as we try to build solutions for the hub. So Shaesta, what's in the news these days?
So there's a couple things that are happening in the news. The first is Phil Washington, who was nominated by President Biden to be the FAA Administrator. He withdrew his nomination, and there were certainly a lot of comments and people weighing in on this topic. So Phil Washington, his background, he back in 2015, he was appointed as the CEO of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. He went on to win several awards for the work that he did with the Transportation Authority. And then in 2021, Washington was appointed as the CEO of Denver International Airport. And that's where his involvement in aviation came from. But he doesn't have any specific aviation sort of experience before that.
Yeah, and it was Senator Ted Cruz who pushed back on his nomination because, the criticism was that at a time when the aviation industry is undergoing some challenging times, from delays and near misses and software issues, we needed to have someone with more extensive background who could hit the ground running. And so one thing Senator Ted Cruz pushed back on was Washington's expertise in safety. Instead, Senator Ted Cruz put forward that Billy Nolen, acting administrator, should be the administrator. So what are your thoughts on that?
So Billy Nolen has, quite the resume. He has over 33 years of experience in operations and corporate safety. He started his career as a 767, 757, and MD-80 pilot with American Airlines. So he has the flying background for sure. He then, after flying, became manager of flight safety with the responsibility for accident and incident investigation. He went on and, served in different roles under that position. After American Airlines, Billy served as Senior Vice President of Safety, Security, and Operations with Airlines for America, where he collaborated with leaders across the airline industry, the government, as well as just like the industry as a whole. And he fits the bill.
Yeah, I think I said this to you. If you were to go to ChatGPT today and say, create me a resume profile of someone who should become FAA administrator, it would probably spit out Billy's experience, from the education background to the work experience, to the leadership positions. It's clear that he is someone who could do the job. And, he's been holding down the fort for the last year. I think some challenges that might come up or some pushback that he might face during a possible hearing is that, some of these things that have happened has happened under his watch. And so they might, push back on how he's handled that. But at the same time, it's really hard to turn a big ship. There's so much inertia, and what he's dealing with hasn't been his doing altogether. But I think I kind of have my money on it being Billy.
I think this is kind of a big thing, because if Billy Nolen is appointed as the FAA administrator, he would be the first African-American Black administrator, which would, be very historical.
I think that would be big. That would be big, not just for, obviously, African-American or Black people, but also for industry that is trying to signal the need for more diversity. And so beyond that, the fact that he's just really qualified for the job makes so much sense. He has extensive experience that would meet the needs of the job.
And, it's not to take anything away from Phil Washington. He has an incredible resume as well. I think this is just in reference to the FAA is a big umbrella. And, when you look at experience, Billy Nolen has more experience in aviation. So both are really great candidates, but I think Billy has more of the experience that would be required by an FAA administrator. So I'm curious, Michael, do you think you need to be a pilot to be an FAA administrator?
It's something I've thought about. When we looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we identified 860 plus jobs that contribute directly and indirectly to the aviation industry. And so being a pilot is literally 0.1% of the professions. But being a pilot captures the perception of what the aviation industry is. And I don't know. I think at the end of the day, your job is to, if I'm an administrator, my job is to put the chess pieces in place so that the system runs properly. I think being a pilot helps because it helps you to understand the experiences that pilots undergo from dealing with complex systems and aeromedical issues. But ultimately, it shouldn't be the thing to disqualify you if you've worked in the system, if you worked in flying adjacent careers. So if you worked in the industry as a safety inspector or someone with who oversees regulatory approval for technology, or even someone with just like strong business background, that would help. But I don't think you should be disqualified, even though it helps.
Yeah, no, I agree. Pilots are trained to do, I don't want to say one thing really well, but you're trained to operate that aircraft. And that's very different than, managing the entire Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA requires a lot more, the administrator would require a lot more just people skills, leadership skills, managing skills. I mean, just things that a pilot wouldn't necessarily utilize every day. So I agree with you, it helps, but aviation is so much bigger than flying. And so a candidate that has a good understanding of the regulations of the entire aviation ecosystem and is able to lead, I think those are far more bigger criterias that should be looked at.
Yeah, well, we'll keep a close eye on how things develop. We've been without an administrator for, I would say, close to a year now. And, we really need to have someone in place, even as we approach the summer months, which are the really busy flying period. So I think there's an imperative to get someone in place really soon.
Right. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you all for joining us on the Uplink podcast. We hope these conversations brought you value for your week, and we look forward to connecting with you next week.